Hello, fellow detectives. Welcome to Unlocked, the official podcast for all things Nancy Drew by Her Interactive. I am your host, Tammy Tuckey, and this week we welcome author Anthony Del Col to the show. Welcome, Anthony.
Thank you for having me on board.
We're glad to have you on the show. I finally read Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys, The Big Lie, which is kind of like a new comic story series for Nancy and the Hardy Boys. But before we jump into that, you're originally a filmmaker, which I find so fascinating. That's what you kind of studied for. So can you talk about being a filmmaker? What kind of inspired you to be a filmmaker in the first place, and how that transition led to being an author and a producer?
I've taken a very weird set of detours to get to where I am. I actually didn't start out in film. I started out in business. I have a business degree from Wilfrid Laurier University, go Golden Hawks, up in Canada, But no, I started out in business with the intention of being an investment banker. And then while I was there, I realized that my passion really was in film and entertainment in general. But I decided to stick through, and I finished off my business school program, and then yes, I did then go to a film school, the Canadian Film Centre up in Toronto, and then I kind of did a bunch of things. I worked as a producer on a couple indie films there. Then I kind of took a detour into the music industry as a music manager for a number of years. And then it was while I was helping to manage a bunch of artists that I came up with an idea for something called Kill Shakespeare. Myself and Conor McCreary had come up with this sort of Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings with all of Shakespeare's characters concept. And we wanted to bring it to life, as any creator does. And so we were trying to play around with, well, how do we bring this to life? Do we do it as a film or a theater show? And we decided to do it as a comic book. And I had never written a comic book series before, neither had Connor. We had done some children's TV and stuff, but decided to do it as a comic book series. And immediately I fell in love with writing in the medium. It was just so great to be able to think of whatever you want to see come to life, and it can come to life. And that's one of the amazing things about comics is you're not tied in with budgets. Really, it's only the constraints of your imagination. So if you want to have a battle with thousands of troops, you can find the right artist and they can do it. If you want to have, show, like a big scene, like, a small scene, whatever you want, and you can do that in the realm of comics. And that's what really brought me to comics. And from there, I've done a number of other things, which of course eventually brought me to Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys, The Big Lie.
And on top of the comic book thing, it's also like a picture or a drawing is worth 1,000 words. So it kind of leaves it up to the reader's imagination to build from that, which I find so helpful as a reader myself, because I never was introduced to any of that until I was in middle school when I started reading comic books, and I was like, oh, this is a different way to read or learn about a story, and it's so much fun.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. That's why I thought, the Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys, The Big Lie, was great to read. I originally thought it was just a book. So when you sent it over to me, I was like, oh my gosh, I haven't read a comic book in so long. This is going to be such a treat. So I spent a whole afternoon just reading it, and I really enjoyed it. I was like, oh, this is just exactly what, it puts the reader in Nancy's and the Hardy Boys' shoes, kind of like what we do at Her Interactive with the games itself. So what was your introduction to Nancy and the Hardy Boys? And did you play any of the Her Interactive games at any point?
Yeah, just to go back to the point about comic books, that is one of the amazing things, is just the ability to tell a story visually. Some of my favorite pages to write or favorite panels within the pages are the ones that have no dialogue whatsoever, where you can just kind of show a character, whether it's Nancy, whether it's Hamlet, whether it's, an assassin from Assassin's Creed, just thinking, contemplating, reacting. And so, it's such a visual, interesting format. And that's why a lot of librarians and a lot of teachers are really starting to incorporate graphic novels and comics into the classroom, because for a lot of students, let's face it, there are a lot of students that just don't enjoy reading. They just don't enjoy the process. But if you put a copy of Nancy Drew Hardy Boys, a graphic novel version of it in their hands, it's a little more interesting to get into, or a little more easy. And so it's sort of a gateway drug into literature, as I like to sometimes call it. But yeah, I mean, in terms of Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys, yeah, I mean, I was fans. I've been a fan of them for quite some time. Years and years, and way too many years ago, when I was a little child, I went to visit my grandparents, my mother's parents, and out in Saskatchewan, Canada. And while I was there, I went down to the basement. They had a bunch of books on the shelf, and they had some of the classic Nancy Drew books, and that was from when my mom was a child. And actually, I have one of them right here on my bookshelf. She's given me one of them, Nancy Drew and the Secret of the Old Clock. So I have it right here in my hands here. And, she kind of put those books into the hands of my sister and I, said, oh, I really loved them when I was a child. And so, we read through them at that time, and I really enjoyed it. And then from there, started to read some Hardy Boys books. And so, yeah, I've been a fan of the characters, especially Nancy Drew, because, she was one of the first real, and I hate to throw this term out there, but real, like a strong female protagonist. She was one of the first ones that I was exposed to as a reader. And so when it came time to finding an IP, or being able to dive into the Nancy Drew world, I mean, I got really excited about really crafting Nancy Drew. It's amazing. Like at all the comic conventions I've gone to or online, I've spoken to so many people that are just huge fans of her interactive, and it seems as though her has done an amazing job of keeping Nancy Drew alive as a character for the last, I don't know how many years, like 5, 10, 15 years, and I just have to give it to everyone at her, like give the plaudits, because they've done an amazing job with Nancy Drew. But one of the great things that I've heard about the games are that, yeah, they do dive into some dark situations. And I mean, one of the perceptions about Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys as well is that because they were, first crafted in the 20s and the 30s, that, it's very frothy entertainment. It's very like simple and very light. But one of the interesting things is when you read some of these stories, like they're dark, like they have dark tones to them, because you have teenagers who are battling hardened criminals. And that's one of the things I wanted to do in The Big Lie, is explore that, because you have, you have people who are 14, 15, 16, 17 years old dealing with people who are murderers and have done many, many bad things in their life. So what's really cool about the game, and is that it's been able to bring that to light, that, these are some dark situations that Nancy can get herself into.
So going into your comic book, for me, I wanted to know nothing about it. So I knew the title, and I wanted to wait till you sent it to me and then just read it, because I did not want to know anything about it. So diving into it, I really loved the surprise of having it have such a more serious tone, but then, having the Hardy Boys and Nancy interact with one another in a different way than we've had seen before in the games and before in the books. So this was really unique. It's like, if you're going to do something and reboot it, because I know we all know that Nancy, a lot of people have wanted to have a TV show and the film, and it's like, how do you put a different spin on it? So what was the inspiration in this different spin for you? How long did it take to say, you know what, we've got the tone down, we know what we want, let's go for it?
The tone was actually one of the very early things, but going back even before that, the original inspiration was a comic series called Afterlife with Archie. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but what it was, and this is before Riverdale even came out, the creator of Riverdale, actually, Roberto Aguilar Sacasa, came up with something called Afterlife with Archie, along with artist Francesco Francavilla. And what it was is that they took the characters from Riverdale, so Archie, Betty, Veronica, Jughead, all of them, and threw them into a completely different genre, and a zombie genre. So there's a zombie outbreak in Riverdale, and all of a sudden all of our main characters are on the run. I think Sabrina, the teenage witch, put a hex, or put a curse on Jughead's dog, and then Jughead becomes a zombie. Before you know it, there's an outbreak. So what was really great about that was that by putting these known classic characters into a different genre, it allowed a different sort of light on them. And it was able to bring out new characteristics of the characters, and yet remain true to who they are. So when I read that, I was inspired. I thought, wait a minute, like, can I do this with other characters that I loved when I was a child? And of course, one of the first thoughts was Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys. And so again, I wanted to put them into a completely different genre. And so in this one here, immediately the image came up to me, which is the very first image in the comic book series, which is Frank and Joe Hardy being interrogated by police separately and accused of a murder of a family member. And I immediately thought, okay, I want to put it into the noir genre, and not, because again, they're detectives, they're teenage detectives, but I wanted to explore like a darker world where, it's not just, hey, we're still going to high school and isn't everything great? And oh yeah, there's a murder we have to solve, but their entire life is going to be consumed by this. And so the mashup of taking it from like a teenage detective story into like hard neo-noir, to me, that was the most interesting thing. And so I had that inspiration. And then from there, I went out to Simon & Schuster and Laura Becker from Moxie Group, who's the licensing agent. And it worked out perfectly that the license was available at that very moment. The comic license from the previous publisher was due to lapse. And so I worked with Simon & Schuster and Laura to develop the IP, develop the pitch, and then brought it out to comic publishers. And Dynamite Comics was the first company that jumped up. They were immediately excited. Even before I went out to publishers, Juan Collado, who's the president there, Laura and I ran into him at Book Expo America, and he's like, "Oh my God, that's great! Like, please, like, send that to me. I want to read what you guys have." And so they're the ones that I start to work with, and they're the ones that published it last year. And I'm really happy with the reaction of the series from Nancy Drew fans, from Hardy Boys fans, and even from those that have no knowledge or insight into the characters whatsoever.
What in the world did Simon and Schuster think? Because again, this is going in a darker direction with the characters. Were they totally on board with it when they heard about it?
Yes, they were actually. I mean, there have been a number of variations, and I think Her Interactive's work on it has really opened their eyes to what you can do with Nancy as a character in terms of light and dark. And so one of the really intriguing things about it was that, I mean, they were quite open to it. They did have some stipulations. They did not want to turn Nancy, Frank, and Joe into murderers or into, like thugs or criminals, and I didn't want to do that either. But no, I mean, to be honest, I was surprised. I didn't know that I would get the amount of backing and the lack of notes from them. Because from day number one, they've been on board, and there was only one story note along the way from Simon & Schuster, and it wasn't even a note. They said you can do that if you'd like, but myself as a fan of this character, I would prefer if you didn't do it. Just because I would be so sad to see this happen to this one character. And I can't say anything more than that, for fear of spoilers. But no, I mean, they've been great. And so I put together, it was a relatively short pitch. It was maybe about 2 pages, piggybacking off of Afterlife with Archie, and sent that out to publishers. And like I said, there was immediately Dynamite was the first one that stepped up. And so Laura Becker, again, the licensing agent, and I turned to each other and was like, well, I guess we should go with Dynamite because they seem to really be passionate about it.
Were there a couple of different people who pitched their own ideas and then you select which route you want to go to? Or did you kind of say, you know what, we're going to hire somebody and then we're going to explain to them what exactly we're looking for, what exactly the feel and the visual that we're specifically looking for the comic book itself? Yeah,
it's a great question. I was very fortunate. I mean, one of the great things about working with Dynamite on this was the work of the editors, Matt Idelson and Matt Humphreys. They are there's perhaps, if not the best, then some of the best editors I've ever worked with before, and they really understood the material. They understood Frank and Joe. They understood the interpretation of Nancy. And Matt Idelson has worked in the industry for 20 plus years, and he's worked on some classic noir takes. I mean, there were classic noir takes of Batman and some other characters that he was very much involved in. So in terms of finding the artist, we want to have a different look to it, because often, there are certain styles of comics that you see all the time. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but I wanted to have something a little bit different, something a little off kilter, something very stylish. So it was Matt Humphreys, the editor there, who had recommended Werther Dell'Edera. And so I took a look at some of his artwork and immediately fell in love with it. I mean, he has just a style where it's rough looking, and that's kind of what you want for the series. And like I said, it just stands out. It's very unique, and it plays well to the noir genre. And so, I mean, we approached him, and it just worked out that he was available at the time. And so, yeah, I mean, it was great. What's interesting is that he and I have never met. We've never been in the same country. He's an Italian artist. So, I mean, we exchange emails all the time, and there's a project that we may be working on together in the future that I can't announce at the moment. But no, I mean, yeah. So, I mean, sometimes you come in with an artist with a pitch. Sometimes you have an idea for an artist. Sometimes an artist surprises you, and this one is the third, where I didn't know what I was looking for. I wanted something different, and Werther's style came to us, and it was perfect. For me, really, the story revolves around Nancy. And the major thing for me was, I mean, we start off with Frank and Joe. And for those that are not familiar with the series, I'll give a very brief overview of it. The big lie revolves around Frank and Joe Hardy, who are accused of murdering their father, Fenton Hardy. He's a disgraced police detective. And so the two brothers have to turn to an old friend of theirs, Nancy Drew, who at first comes across as very femme fatale. As though she's totally in control of the situation. But as the story goes on, the three of them have to dive into the seedy underbelly of small town USA, into Bayport, the Hardys' hometown. And so it's always asking the question, these are three people who are good. They are good and honest individuals, but in order to solve this case, they have to do a bit of bad. Now, that does not mean that they're doing any major criminal activity or anything like that. They're doing some small little things that probably they wouldn't ordinarily do, but this is all in the name of finding out who murdered their father. And so for me, really boiled down to Nancy. And I was really intrigued by Dynamite originally pitched as a femme fatale character, which I think is interesting, and I apologize for the sirens in the background. Maybe it's very ominous or very fitting for what I'm talking about. But Nancy is a character that at first comes across as very much in control, but as the story goes on, we start to see her lose a bit of that control, but gain control in other aspects, to the point where there's the big climax, and that heavily impacts Nancy. So for me, yeah, I really wanted to dive into the characters and also the interaction between the three of them, and how do we delineate these three characters who are generally perceived, incorrectly I think, but generally perceived as very good, wholesome characters, and how do they react when they're thrown into this sort of the deep end of a seedy situation. And so really, to me, the most interesting thing was that the interaction between the three of them, and the arguments, the conflict, but also how the three of them work together to solve the case.
Is there anywhere else that they can go ahead and purchase the book besides Amazon? And we can link it in the show notes below if you want to tell us a little more.
No, it's available everywhere. So it's available at any major bookstore. I mean, here in the U.S., it's at every Barnes and Noble. It's on Amazon. Any comic book shop. You can also get it digitally on Comixology or any place that has digital comics. So it's widely released. So it is available everywhere. I hope that you're not the only one that goes out and buys a copy, because I have more stories in line for Nancy, Frank, and Joe. The original contract that I have with Dynamite has it for at least 2 volumes. Volume number 1 is out, and I'm currently in discussions with Dynamite for volume number 2. So the more people that go out and buy it, the more we will find out, because, spoiler alert, there is a cliffhanger. There's a small little cliffhanger ending at the end of this first volume, as part of the bigger picture that I have. So, I hope as many listeners here would love to check it out. It's got a really interesting take on Nancy, interesting take on Frank and Joe Hardy. It's for those that like Riverdale, I think you'll enjoy this. For those that don't like Riverdale, I think you'll enjoy this. Some people have compared it to Veronica Mars. I think one reviewer said it's the season of Veronica Mars that we didn't get. But yeah, I mean, I know that was very glowing praise. I loved it.
It's very specific. I actually like that.
It's actually really cool. I know. I was quite happy with it. The reviews across the board have been very strong. I'm really happy with.
And I'm so happy for you that they are. I was reading them after I read the comic book because I didn't want any spoilers, and everybody is just raving about it. And I'm like, I agree with them. I'm so glad to see that.
Well, thank you. And for those that do read it and do enjoy, please post reviews online and spread the word. I mean, every little comment counts. And yeah, I mean, there's even been some interest in LA on this story because, again, Riverdale has been extremely successful. for CW, and so I've been approached by numerous individuals about adapting this for TV. And
Who do
it's
you
something
see playing the boys and Nancy? If you could pick, who would you like?
I, I can't answer that right now. There's many options for that. I mean, we did use a number of film and TV actors for references for Nancy and for the boys along the way, but I mean, a lot of them were. Yeah, I mean, to do this correct, you need to, a lot of the references were people in their 20s and 30s. I said, yeah, a younger version of this character, like a younger version of Joseph Gordon-Levitt, or like Cara Delevingne or something like that. But I mean, by the time a television show would go into production, and again, the rights are all over the place, and it's been a real eye-opening experience as to how Hollywood works in terms of having to gather the film and TV rights for these characters because they're owned and operated in all different locations.
Yeah, that's the only downside.
Yeah,
it's like
it's a downside,
climbing up that hill.
but for me, it's also an affirmation of, hey, there's something really, we've been able to put together a really good book here. And that's opened a lot of eyes in LA. And at the very end of the day, I mean, some of the best comments I have that I've read online or people that have spoken to me directly at shows are that, they're fans of Nancy Drew, and this is perhaps the most interesting take they've had or they've experienced, and they really enjoy it.